running under the Oceania flag.
There we can see the men now getting ready for their event, which will take place on exactly the same course. The only difference is that they will be running 5 stages. Here is the lineup. You can see a terrific lineup there with the USA, Kenya, Ethiopia, Japan, France, Italy, Portugal, Spain, an Asian team, an Oceania team. And we should point out that, in fact, what we have is the first 8 teams, the first 8 nations in the World Cross Country Championships, plus the Japanese team and the Oceania team, and 2 other teams which have been selected by the IAAF. That is how the field has been put together for this first men's road relay world challenge. And see the teams just getting ready for what will be the first stage. The first 4 stages, in fact, of the men's race are exactly the same as the women's, and the only difference comes at the stage where the 5th leg runner runs all the way through to the finish. Runners just getting ready. Remember the 2 laps they have to do in the stadium. Oh, I thought that was a full start there, but in fact the runners weren't recalled. I think with the distance as they have to run, it's not all that significant. And heading up in the front there is Keith Brantley of the USA. The Americas team, that's Francisco Pacheco of the Americas team. And like the women's race, nobody really wants to take the pace this early. 10 kilometers, just over 6 miles on this first stage. See, there's quite a big crowd here to watch the start and finish of these events. And wearing number 3 there in the white is Carl Thackeray of Great Britain, Northern Ireland. And for Kenya, that's Some Muge. As the runners heading round to the end of the 400 meters, we'll see what sort of time they cover 400 meters in as an indication of the sort of pace that they'll be doing. Again, it's for the Americas team there, still Francisco Pacheco, still leading there, and Some Muge of Kenya, as they leave the stadium now, 2 minutes 55, 56, obviously going quite a bit faster as you'd expect than the women's race. And there they go, Keith Brantley in the red there for the United States, leading them out. And it seems very much like the women's race, that they jogged round the 2 laps, and then once they got out onto the road, and they could feel the firm surface of the road beneath their feet, a race really developed. And before that, everybody was reluctant to lead, but you can see already the pace up a little tiny bit here. Brantley in the red there, and for the Americas team in the all blue, that is Pacheco. Carl Thackeray in the white, and Muge for Kenya. Kenya, the surprise world team cross-country champions earlier this year. And Ethiopia also taking part, of course, in this event. Bolte, running for Ethiopia in this first leg, will be very, very keen to show that that was just one occasion on which they weren't quite together, shall we say. They lost their world cross-country team title. Here a reminder of the course they do, that first 10 kilometers there. This is the leg that we're seeing at the moment. And the second leg heads back towards the stadium and branches off just before. And they have this twist and turn, then out the 25 kilometer point, and then the turn back towards 30 kilometers, following the course right back to the stadium again. The marathon course is used in the IAAF Marathon Cup in 1985 in total, and 5 stages, only 5 stages. The first 4 stages exactly the same as the women's race, but when it comes to that last leg, the 5th leg, in fact, with the men's race, the last leg runner has to run 12.195 kilometers. Here is Carl Thackeray in the white for Great Britain, and he is going along quite a clip. I think already we're seeing the field breaking up here. We can see the leading contenders at this point. There's Thackeray wearing number 3. They're running the European Championships in Stuttgart for Great Britain, the 10,000 meters. And he is making the pace with coming to 7 kilometer point. And Thackeray really stretching away now. We can see behind the field stretching out. There's Monaghetti, the Australian nearest. running with Semi Muge of Kenya. They're in 3rd and 4th place at the moment, with 8.3 kilometers gone. And they'll be very soon getting ready to hand over at that 10-kilometer point, handing over those sashes. And the leading two here, Bolte of Ethiopia in the red, and Thackeray for Britain in the white. In the lead, this is the early leader who's going backwards really now, Pacheco, and John Solly. They're waiting to take over from Carl Thackeray for Great Britain. That's John Solly taking over now, the Commonwealth 10,000 meters champion. And for Ethiopia, that is Debaby Demisi taken over in 2nd place. For the Oceania team, Dave Burridge, New Zealander, taking over from his Australian teammate there, Steve Monaghetti. And for the Kenyan team, that was Joseph Kiptum taking over from Muge. Now here the tall figure of John Solly, who was unbeaten 10,000 meters on the track. Run 27 minutes 51 seconds for that distance, won the Commonwealth Games gold medal. And he is making the pace out there in front. And behind, you see the Japanese team. That's Shuichi Yoneshigi. And he's making good progress. But Solly has broken away now, coming to 14.4 kilometers. Solly clearly in the lead here. He really has been one of the discoveries of the world athletics scene. And this is Burridge, New Zealander Dave Burridge, running for the Oceania team. Then Kiptum behind him for Kenya. Kenya, remember, the world cross-country team champions for 1986. A little bit of a surprise that at Neuchâtel in Switzerland earlier this year, but Kenya really beginning to regain some of their former glories as a nation of distance runners. But for Japan, that's Yoneshigi. He's overtaking Boff at this point. Going very, very well. Of course, the Japanese crowd here, delighted to see the Japanese team moving through. Got a terrific amount of encouragement around the course here, Yoneshigi. Hiroshima is actually built on 6 rivers. It's called the City of Water, and you can see why. There's a great deal of water around the city. But John Solly on his own there in the lead. Here's Demisi of Ethiopia in 2nd place. You can see Solly right up there in the distance because the road here runs very, very straight and turns back on itself several times. It's really a twisty part of the course, this. And Solly still leading there. The marshals waving him around that corner. He'll be coming up after 17 kilometers of running. He'll be making the 2nd handover for the 3rd stage. And the runners here looking down the course to see how near the runners are. Here we get an idea of just how complicated this 2nd leg is. It really twists round. About 200 meters left to that next changeover now. John Solly will be handing over to Mark Scrutton for Great Britain in the lead. Mark Scrutton, somebody who's very, very experienced in road races all over the world. And Solly really has opened up a big lead. Remember, he took over practically alongside Demisi of Ethiopia. Big crowd gathered here at the 17-kilometer point. But Solly running very, very strongly. And he'll be handing over. Here's Scrutton wearing number 3 for Britain, just looking down the course at the 17-kilometer point, ready for this takeover. Solly takes the sash off and hands over to Scrutton. This 3rd stage is 8 kilometers. And coming in for the 2nd changeover for the Ethiopian team, this is Demisi handing over to Bakila Debele, who was the 1983 World Cross-Country Champion. So the Ethiopians be very, very keen for Debele, who was actually 4th in this year's World Cross-Country Championships, to try to close that gap down. Burridge coming in now for the Oceania team. He's handing over to Andrew Lloyd. They're in 3rd place now. But still in the lead, Mark Scrutton. Has that long, loping stride. He's never raced more than 10 miles on the road. He's not a mountain runner by any means. Here, Kiptum is handing over to Morandi in 4th place for Kenya. And Yoneshigi is handing over to Nakayama in 5th place, and Takayuki Nakayama of Japan, one of the country's top marathon runners, on the tall side for a marathon runner, but very, very good marathon runner. He's run 2:8:15 for the marathon and looks to be a very great prospect for the future, but he too may find that this leg of 8 kilometers will be just a little bit too short for him, but he'll have a terrific support from the crowd, who are hailing him as one of Japan's new heroes. Here's Nakayama chasing after Morandi for Kenya. And back in the lead, Mark Scrutton still has a substantial gap he's holding on to. This course very, very fast. You can see great support here for Nakayama, and seems to be moving through there past Morandi of Kenya. And this is the stage that we're at. We're coming up 17 kilometers gone, and they're on the 3rd leg, and you can see here's Mark Scrutton for Britain in the lead, just coming up to the 20-kilometer point. The 3rd takeover zone is at the 25-kilometer point. And there's a most unusual shot of the leader, and you can see that long flat stretch of road. That's all he can see at the moment. And behind him, Bekele Debele of Ethiopia, the former world cross-country champion. And here's Nakayama, still getting terrific support from the crowd. He's having a great run here. And he's just having a battle there with Morandi of Kenya. Absolutely side by there. And of course, the crowd very, very excited to see Nakayama running so well. Here's Mark Scrutton still in the lead for Britain. And for the Oceania team, this is Andrew Lloyd. They're in 3rd place at the moment. Scrutton will be coming up to the next change. This will be the 4th leg coming up, 4th of the 5 legs. And he'll be handing over to his British teammate, Dave Clark. Dave Clark, very, very experienced cross-country runner who's run in the IAAF World Cross-Country Championships many times for England. And he's looking down the road. Scrutton coming in very, very strongly, but in the background we can see Debele of Ethiopia, some, well, 100 meters perhaps behind, as Dave Clark takes the sash there for Britain, and away he goes on what is the penultimate stage of this IAAF World Road Relay Challenge. And I thought for a moment someone had dropped a sash, but I think maybe it's the Ethiopian sash has slightly come apart, but I don't think they'll be disqualified for that. This is Debele handing over to Malesi Faisa for Ethiopia. I don't know whether that means he won't be able to wear the sash, but he's just it seems as though it's okay. And for the Oceania team, that is Chris Tobin taken over from Andrew Lloyd. For Kenya, this is John Ngugi will be taking over here from Morandi. John Ngugi, the world cross-country champion. And he takes over now. Nakayama there, that terrific run. They had a terrific battle there. And Nakayama is handing over there to Ito. Kunimitsu Ito for Japan, but back with the leader, Dave Clark, and that gap seems to have stretched a bit more now. It was down to perhaps 100 meters at the takeover point, but I think Dave Clark is definitely stretching it out now. And for Kenya, Ngugi definitely pulling away from Ito in 4th and 5th place, but still Dave Clark leading for Britain. And in the background there we can see Faisa of Ethiopia battling away with Tobin of the Oceania team. They can see Dave Clark, and this is a situation a little bit reminiscent of the women's race, where the 2nd and 3rd runners were together trying to close that gap in the closing stages. There's one more stage after this, remember, and that's a 12-kilometer point. Now they're just doing this rather tight 180-degree turn there. That was Tobin and and Faisa of Ethiopia rather just doing that turn together there, and that is heading down towards the fourth takeover, which will be at 30 kilometers. Here's Ito of Japan getting terrific support from the crowd, but at the moment he is fading a little bit. But Dave Clark still battling away in front here for Great Britain. In fact, in the past, Great Britain has competed as 4 home countries separately in the World Cross Country Championships, but from '88 that will change. Here we are, the battle for second place, and Faisa definitely getting away now from Chris Tobin. And Faisa for Ethiopia trying to close that gap. Dave Clark desperately looking back there as they're coming up to the 30-kilometer point, where he will be handing over for the last takeover point. There's Carl Harrison of Great Britain looking anxiously down the course. He can see Dave Clark in the lead there, but he can see that the gap is not an enormous one. And it's all up to Carl Harrison from this last 12.195 kilometers. And Harrison takes the sash now and sets off. He is the national 10 miles champion for Great Britain. But Faisa here and Tobin are still pretty much together, as waiting on the line there. That's Abibi Makonnen for Ethiopia. He'll be taking over from Faisa. And for the Oceania team, that's Adam Hoyle, the Australian. And Makonnen anxious to get after Clark, but in fact the Oceania team just slightly ahead there at that takeover, and that was the Australian Adam Hoyle just got into second place there ahead of Makonnen. And fourth place here, the Kenyans. This is John Ngugi's had a great run there, handing over to Andrew Masai. And for Japan, just behind them, that is Ito handing over now to Nishimoto. And off they go. So 12 kilometers this last stage. Here's the leader, Carl Harrison. Not a tremendously experienced runner for Britain internationally, but he's run very many road races in Britain. But here already, Makonnen of Ethiopia has got into second place and beginning to break away from Adam Hoyle of the Oceania team. There's Harrison. A lot rests on his shoulders now as Makonnen, who has had a great year in the marathon this year. He's won 3 major marathon titles, Rotterdam, Montreal and Addis Ababa, and very, very formidable competitor. And he's somebody who was almost World Cross Country champion this year. He had a terrific battle in Neuchâtel and just lost the World Cross Country title by just 2 seconds. Here's the map to show us exactly where the runners are at the moment. That was 30 kilometers, and they're on this stage now. This is the point at which we are. We're heading back towards the stadium with Carl Harrison for Great Britain in the lead. And in the distance there, in the green vest for Ethiopia, it is Makonnen. There's Makonnen, who was, as I say, second in the World Cross Country Championships this year. And if New Zealand in the women's race had a great disappointment there when they were told they were going to be the winning team, and then the points were added up again and they found they were only second, Ethiopia had a little bit of an embarrassment at the World Cross Country. They lost their team title there for the first time to Kenya, and they would dearly love to some sort of amends by winning this inaugural World Road Relay Challenge event. So Harrison still working hard, but there's something like 6 kilometers left, and that gap slowly but surely seems to be closing. There's Makonnen for Ethiopia, a country that has produced so many great athletes in recent years. And he can see Harrison, but Harrison can't see him. And in a way, surprised Harrison is still taking very much the central line on the road. He could possibly have saved himself a little bit by moving a little bit more to the left there, which is the point at which the course would have been measured. 38.5 kilometers coming up. And Harrison, with his entourage of police motorcyclists and cars all round him, spectators Very much a man under pressure, because behind him that gap, almost imperceptibly, but according to the clock, is in fact closing. Just under 4 kilometers left to the stadium. Harrison takes a quick look over his shoulder, and this is Nishimoto of Japan, who's catching Kenya now. That's Andrew Masai of Kenya just in front of him, and the crowd not quite so thick on the course here, but the odd flag urging him on. Here we see the gap from behind. This is McConan. He can see Harrison. He can see exactly what he's got to do. With 1 hour 52, they're probably about 7 minutes away from the finish line now. McConan there, very, very experienced runner. And in fact, the further it goes, the more suit him, because as one of the world's top marathon runners, that will, the distance is in his favor. This is Nishimoto, ahead of Masai of Kenya now. And up at the front, Harrison not looking quite so fresh now. That gap is definitely closing there. Look, you can see how much McConan has cut back on Harrison, but they are getting very close to the stadium as well. This is going to be a terrific finish, because Harrison still has that lead. He knows he's practically within sight of the stadium, and yet he looks over his shoulder desperately, because McConan for Ethiopia is closing on him now. Probably no more than 2 minutes or so left to run in this race, as Harrison swings left there up towards the stadium. Crowd already waiting in the stadium to see who's going to come in first. Harrison still looking over his shoulder, which suggests that he's by no means confident of holding on to this lead, which Britain in fact have held since the first leg. Remember, they've led throughout this race. And Harrison just swinging round the road here. He'll very shortly see the entrance into the stadium, and here is McConan. We can see just behind Harrison as Harrison swings into the track. Carl Harrison for Britain, and he has something like 10 meters ahead of McConan. And McConan, who perhaps misjudged his finish in the World Cross Country Championships, surely he isn't going to do the same thing here. Look at this for a terrific finish. Carl Harrison for Britain and McConan of Ethiopia. They've still got 400 meters to go. I wonder whether McConan realized that. I'm not sure if he actually looked as though he thought the finish was on the finish line in the track, but if he did, he's regained his composure very, very quickly. And not finished. Look, Harrison is still trying to come back at McConan, but you sense that maybe that was his last effort there. It seemed like he was going to stage another attack, but surely McConan now for Ethiopia has opened up a gap that he will not lose. Something like 200 meters left now. Harrison hasn't given up. Harrison is having another go, and this is going to be a desperately close finish. McConan now looking over his shoulder, and Harrison comes at him again. There's something like 100 meters left, and the crowd are going absolutely mad in the stadium after 26 miles of this World Road Relay Challenge, and it's just come down to two men battling it out down the home straight. McConan for Ethiopia in the green vest, desperately hanging on. Carl Harrison only has 50 meters left, but it's too late, and a great victory there for Ethiopia, and a tremendously disappointed Carl Harrison, who gave everything that he could at the finish of that event there.
What a marvellous finish for a marathon, just 3 seconds separating Ethiopia from Great Britain. A very strong and brave showing by the British team over the last leg, but it just couldn't quite peg back the Ethiopians, who seem set to extend their monopoly from cross-country now to road. So that was the first ever international road race relay held in Hiroshima just a few weeks ago. Very successful innovation.